several wars. The great letters saying women are supposed to be personally.
Look who's here!
Unless you know for sure what's direct.
Brave to have been arrested.
Okay.
Really, I'm very grateful to be here. It's been wonderful to be in Minnesota. I actually walked here once. I was so eager to get here. But this time, I've been very fortunate to come here to Minneapolis and then go to various parts of Minnesota and once again get that sense of being connected to, I suppose in the New Testament there's a phrase that will do as well as any, being surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. Surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. Thank you, Jack, for your wisdom this morning, and Miss T. Rowan, thank you for all of your words, for the music, for the time together, for the hospitality. And of course, I'm especially grateful to Marie and John Braun, who have welcomed me into their home and family and hearts. I don't know why I had, I'm getting over it, an excessive fear of edges. It wasn't heights, it was edges. And I'd be on a Chicago train platform and be trying to grab other people's children because I was so afraid the children would go over the edge, and there was probably a good 2 feet. It was just neurosis. And I am trying to get over it, but I had quite a lot of help. I was in Afghanistan for the very first time that I'd ever gone there, to the Bamyan province, and I was doing pretty well, going up mountainsides and crossing over a number of streams. But then we got to one point where we were supposed to cross over a river, and it looked to me like it was a popsicle stick going across, and I froze. The left foot wouldn't go in front of the other, and I was just stuck as though I was a statue waiting for a bird to perch on my head. And finally the kids realized she's not going anyplace. And so they kind of did this choreography with one in front of me and one behind, and the other kind of moving my left foot in front of the right. And finally Fies just jumped in the water, put out his long arms, and said, "My grandmother, I catch you." So when I tell you that what motivates me is that I fall in love easily, that's it. I mean, in all those years of teaching high school kids, I never really thought that I'd find that I had a group of mentors between 13 and 17 years of age guiding my life, but I would fall into their arms readily. They're wonderful youngsters. My sisters were a little sheepish. About 2 seasons ago, they took me out to lunch, and they said, "We're not sure if Mom would have wanted us to tell you this, but she really did think you were working for the CIA." And I guess my mother used to tell them, "Every time Kathy comes back from those other countries, she goes right to Washington, D.C., and I'm sure she's given them a briefing." So actually, she was in cell block C, not even giving out her last name, but I think we do need intelligence in our world. We are so desperate for intelligence, and Jack certainly puts us on the right track, and not only asking the questions, but having the conversations in our communities. So I'd like to just kind of reinforce that with a story that helps keep me a little bit grounded. I was a prisoner in a county jail in Cass County, Missouri, and boy, those county jails don't have much oversight, and so whoever's in charge can kind of run the place however they want. And so, I don't know, I guess I'd been there long enough to kind of earn some credibility. They called me Missiles, and I thought, well, I'll just let that go, because I was just trying to work my way into the community. And I'd done pretty well. And at one point, a woman with a DUI, driving under the influence, was brought into the prison. And I was kind of the welcome wagon by then, and I was trying to make sure everything went well for her. But she had a newspaper, so before she left the next morning, she had a very wealthy lawyer who'd gotten her out. I said, "Do you think you could leave us that newspaper?" And she had a very thick southern drawl. She said, "Oh, honey, that's yesterday's, yeah, I'll get today's newspaper. I'll have it sent right in." And I said, "Well, actually, that one's fine, because when we run out of toilet paper and..." Well, she was so horrified, she slapped a lawsuit on the Cass County Jail as soon as she got out together with the lawyer. And the Cass County Jail was run by Major Nick and Sergeant Roy. And Major Nick's only volume was full blast. His eyeballs were hitting his glasses. He had slicked back hair. His belly kind of hung over his belt. And he always had his Hawaiian shirt unbuttoned for the bottom 3 buttons. He was a character. I loved him, really. And he'd always pull me into his office and say, "Would you still be a pacifist if I had a knife in my drawer and I was about to plunge it into your heart?" And I hope so, Major Nick. So Major Nick was very, very, very upset, and he came with his kind of sidekick, Sergeant Roy, into the Cass County Jail to ask, "Which one of you all bitches in this here county jail had the nerve to say we do not give you toilet paper?" And every woman said the equivalent of, "Oh, it must have been missiles. You take good care of us, Major Nick. We know you all look after us." And so he got to me and I said, "You don't give us paper towel, cleaning supplies, toilet paper. We don't get sanitary napkins. The food is slop. We don't get any way to get our mail out. You shouldn't be running a kennel for dogs, much less a place where people live." And I thought the other women would say, "Yeah," and people were reading their scriptures and sorting their socks. And I thought, well, what happened to me? A glass of Kool-Aid tipped over. An hour later, women were shouting, "Guard, guard, can we get some toilet paper in here? Guard, can we get some paper towel?" Nothing. The ants come in, sticky, big mess. I just didn't understand. And I still didn't understand. I was locked up in the federal prison, and I will say one thing about the federal prison. On a Saturday morning, you get a gigantic cinnamon roll and a cup of coffee. So I would get up early to get my cinnamon roll. And I would always sit with Lorraine Battles, who was the toughest woman in the Cass County Jail, and she and I became good friends. So finally I said, "Lorraine, what was going on that morning when everybody said that Major Nick took good care of us in the Cass County Jail?" And she looked at me as though, could it be that anyone could have such a thick skull? And once she started to explain it to me, I got it right away. She said, "Any woman in that jail who gave Major Nick any guff could have lost her visiting privileges and not seen her kids, and she might have gone away for 8 or 10 years and not seen her children before they left. Major Nick could have made sure she didn't see a lawyer or see a priest. He could have made sure she couldn't fix herself up with commissary equipment before she went off to see the people that were going to judge what her fate would be. Major Nick could have made sure that she would be absolutely miserable. Missiles, you didn't have anything to lose." And then I got it. To those to whom much is given, much is expected. To those to whom much is given, much is expected. And it's by pure accident of birth. I've been born into this setting where I just always presume lights on, food, clean water, pleasant accommodations, security, health security, food security. I just have it all. But our security is not founded in our overconsumption. We know it's not founded in our wars. We know we're jeopardizing the futures of our children. We know we're so foolish telling the scientists to make us some more weapons when the greatest terror we all face is what we're doing to our own environment, to Mother Nature. We need to protect the rights of Mother Nature. We know it. We know guilt isn't the best motivator. We know fear isn't the best motivator. So that's why I keep thinking about that stream, and I'm so glad, Bill, that you played that song. We're crossing the stream. We just have to go across and be confident that we'll be there to catch one another if we fall. And anyway, we weren't put on this earth to live forever. I want to tell you a little bit about some of the most recent egregious information about waste and wreckage of war. The first one isn't egregious, but in Afghanistan, in the Helmand province, $34 million was spent to build a brand new building, even though as it was being constructed, word was coming from top military brass in Afghanistan, this is really a big waste of time. There's no point to continuing this building. But I guess contracts had been made or money had been passed out. Anyway, the construction continued. Truckloads of furniture came. It was all put in the building. The building is ready to go. And now the higher-ups are saying, well, we either have to give it to somebody else or bulldoze it. And it looks like, according to Rajiv Chandrasekhar in the Washington Post, they'll do the latter. They'll just bulldoze it. Now, $34 million is pocket change for the Pentagon. I understand that. But $34 million for any one of your townships, counties, cities, projects, local infrastructure, and $34 million in Afghanistan. You want to talk about madness of war. Women coming to tell me, I think I'm losing my mind. I think I'm becoming emotionally disturbed. I think I'm going mad. And when you ask, why, Shakina? What's wrong, Nuri? Say more, Nikbat. It's always the same. I can't feed my children. What are you having in your home? Stale bread and tea without sugar, and then the tears. So then we find out, and I found this out the same week I read about my young friend Burmai. I wrote about him rather. He's a youngster who has such a big heart. He's one of the Afghan peace volunteers, and he's also sturdy and strong, and none of the kids want to be the one to do the embarrassing task of hauling the garbage to the garbage dump. It's kind of beneath them in a way. And so Gurumai knows no one wants to do it. So he had hauled all the garbage together and put it on a wheelbarrow, and he was trying to go through very bumpy, uneven streets and not tip it over and be even more embarrassed. And he's on his way to the garbage dump, probably hoping no one will see him. And along came 4 Peshto boys, Gurumai's Hazara. The Peshto boys stopped him, and they asked him, they were on their bicycles, could you help us out? We're trash collectors. We're on our way to the dump, but if we could just go through your trash right now, that would save us some time. And so Gurumai said yes, and he stopped and he waited, and the kids worked as fast as they could going through the trash that had been collected over a week's time while I was in Afghanistan, and I knew that trash is trash. They managed to salvage bits of bread, stale bread, and paper that could be used for fuel. And while they were at work, they pointed to what we call a poppy palace. There are loads of them in Kabul. They're big, ostentatious, colorful, but just almost maddening houses that are built by warlords and drug lords, and they kind of loom over the city. And one of the youngsters said, look at that castle and see how those people live. And look at how we live. So that disparity, the 99 and the 1, is certainly present in Afghanistan. But you know, now some of those very same young trash collectors earning their living by trying to gain salvage may be going through the trash of the U.S. military in an unusual way. The United States military has now decided to junk $7 billion worth of equipment. It doesn't want to ship it out because it would be too expensive. So they're going to melt their tanks, their mine-resistant armor personnel, rafts and carriers. They're going to melt them down into scrap metal that they can then sell for pennies on the Afghan market. So that's another $7 billion. It's going to cost $28 billion for the U.S. military to ship out, to carry out by truck, its materials that it doesn't any longer need. So we're already over $35 billion in just that discussion. Now, a noted researcher from the time of looking at Vietnam and what it would take to accomplish reconstruction of infrastructure in Vietnam, Alfred McCoy, back in 2010, put a price tag on what he thought would be necessary to reconstruct the rural agricultural infrastructure of Afghanistan, $34 billion. And in 1 week, we spend that on our waste. Now that war is certainly not going to be over. The United States is going to continue 9 military bases, 3 airfields, 3 major prisons. And anyway, even if every troop person were to come home, but don't believe that because they're going to keep security contractors there They're going to keep Joint Special Operations Forces, the most menacing warriors on the planet, in Afghanistan. They're going to keep building Camp Integrity, which Blackwater, now renamed, after it was renamed Academy, Blackwater is constructing to train Afghan soldiers to become Special Operations Forces and conduct the despicable night raids, and call in the drone attacks, and call in Combat Brigade Unit helicopters to do aerial bombardments that have again and again and again targeted and killed children. No, the war isn't going to end. But even if all the troops came home, we have to include in our education and our outreach to the U.S. public and to every other public all around the world the awareness that war isn't over when it's over. The war isn't over when it's over, unless you're someone who died in the war. And I know that I'm talking to the group that so acutely understands this. The war isn't over when it's over for those who were maimed, for those who were tortured, for those who were bereaved. It isn't over when it's over for the torturers, for those with memories that lead them to be among those who think about hurting themselves, harming themselves. And we now have 22 suicides amongst veterans of war in the United States every single day. How fortunate that we have these sturdy Iraq vets against war. They said it through tears, but the last time I was with them in Houston, Texas, the head of the group said, you know, I'm damn proud that I can count on one hand the number of members of Iraq Veterans Against War who've committed suicide, because they've learned to make a priority to build community, to build the beloved community. And so that also is part of our charge, to cross that stream, to keep building, to keep affirming the beloved community amongst ourselves, amongst our groups here in this country, and we can do it globally. And that's why I'm so, so fortunate to have contact with the Afghan peace volunteers and with these seamstresses. Do you know, the winter of 2012 was the harshest winter on record in Afghanistan, and 100 people froze to death. 400 people every single day are displaced by the war. Where can they go? They go to overcrowded cities in Afghanistan. There's no room for them. They move into wretched refugee camps, Steve would tell you. They live under circumstances almost unimaginable to us. And when the winter comes, they have no protection against the ice and the frigid cold. And so amongst those 100 who died in 2012, 26 were children. And 8 lived in the Chari-Hikamba refugee camp. And I had gotten to know one particular family, a family that had been attacked by a drone when they lived in the Sangin district of Helmand. And the drone attack caused 5 children to die immediately, ripped the arm off of a little 9-year-old girl, mangled the leg of a teenage son, killed their mother. And so the brothers, they were all goat herders, they quickly got together. They said, we can't stay here, because the Taliban might accuse us of being the reason that this drone attacked. And so they picked up everything they could, and they fled, and they left their animals to thirst or die in the Sangin district of the Helmand province, and they're still living now in this dreadful spot in Afghanistan's Kabul, the capital. So those kinds of stories abound, and the women who had come to say that they couldn't feed their children were actually better off, at least they had a roof over their head, than the people in the refugee camps that were swelling in numbers all the time. And so we thought about it really hard, and finally one of the Afghan peace volunteers just came up with this kind of eureka idea. If the seamstresses, the women who had by then formed a seamstress co-op, could make duvets, the heavy blankets that the poor need when they're living out rough under tents, if they could make them, then maybe the Afghan peace volunteers could do the heft and the brawn. It's a lot of heavy lifting to get the wool in and to get the coverlet material and to get them distributed. And so 2,000 of these heavy blankets were made and distributed. And the funding for it came entirely from people in Australia, the UK, and the United States. Well, who is going to get these heavy blankets? The young Afghan peace volunteers were like little social workers going up the mountainsides and going into the homes to try to find out what their situations were. And they'd take some notes and come back down and share what they'd learned. And so one day they asked me, will you come with us? We want you to understand what's happening. And so I went up the mountainside with Banin and Zainab, two wonderful young women, and Ali and Abdulhai, two wonderful young men. And believe me, it's pushing the envelope to have young women and young men doing a project together. But we pushed that envelope and it was pushing the envelope to drag myself up the mountain. So I promptly fainted when we got up above an altitude I was accustomed to. And so in we went to the home of Horeb. And she was so gracious to me. She realized that I needed some green tea pretty quickly. And she shelled almonds all throughout, I think, about a 2-hour visit, and put all the almond shells into they called it a bukhari, a little stove, very little stove. Of course, she didn't have money to get wood or even coal, so she used the almond shells for fuel. And even though I know she would have liked to offer us some almonds, she couldn't, because she had to take every one of those almond meats, put them in a bag, get them to the marketplace, and survive on whatever she could earn from the sale of the almonds. It was very cold in her room, but the room next door that housed 8 people had experienced very terrible damage because the snows were so heavy and it wasn't well constructed, and part of the wall caved in. And so, of course, she said to those 8 people, move in with me and my daughter. And when I asked her, what do you most need, Horeb? She didn't say food. She didn't say clean water, even though the widows and orphans that get pushed up the mountain have to walk 25 minutes down roads that there is no road as best I can see. It's just rutted ice. And then get water mounted on their heads or on their shoulders, 25 minutes back up the mountain into a hovel. She said what she most needs is education. And we have that in common with her, don't we? Because we need the education to understand that when the United States think tanks in the service of the Pentagon and the United States government try to sell us the marketed ploy that wars are humanitarian, we know to say with a fierceness, a loving fierceness, there is no such thing as a humanitarian war. There never was, there never will be. Not the responsibility to protect, not the idea that we got rid of Saddam Hussein or some other dictator, and certainly not the idea that the United States is in Afghanistan to protect the women and the children. In fact, do you know, it has cost in the past $800 to fill 1 gallon of fuel for an airborne or landborne military vehicle. It's now down to 400, but it had gone up to 800, and it has to do with it. Hang on. I learned some problem solving from the peace movement. I don't even know how to drive, but I know there's something wrong with that statistic. The reason that it can cost so much is because the United States is paying out sums of money to the drug lords and the warlords who control those roads. And they will charge as much as they think they can basically squeeze out of the U.S. taxpayer. Now, what kind of madness is that? That we're spending $2 billion per week to maintain the United States military presence in Afghanistan, in a country where close to 36% of the people are in the category of below the poverty line. And we're shelling out the money to help the people who are building the poppy palaces and running the drug trade. It doesn't make any sense. And it's been documented by Congressman John Tierney, the amounts of money that go into these companies that are formed to basically make the payouts. So we ought not ever to allow ourselves to consume that fiction. And they'll keep on trying to peddle it to us. By they I mean these well-paid think tanks and public relations firms, going all the way back to when we were told that young Naira, as she wept in front of a Senate investigating committee, had seen Iraqi soldiers dump babies out of incubators. Then it turned out 6 months later, the very people who had created this hoax. Nayera had never left the United States. She was the daughter of a diplomat from Kuwait. The people who created the hoax were the Hill and Knowlton public relations firm. So the wars are marketed to us, and we must not consume them. But I would like to offer one story that gives me personally a great deal of hope. These Afghan peace volunteers, of course, they're very curious. They ask me, what's global warming? And then 2 weeks later, they've got a tennis ball inside of a plastic bag, and they're trying to do an informal teach-in on greenhouse gases. What's fracking? That one they still can't believe. I think they think I make stuff up. Who is Bradley Manning? What is WikiLeaks? And it goes on. Well, one of them is Abdul Hai, is a Hazara youngster, and he's going to school. The idea of the Afghan peace volunteers is to live together interethnically, Hazara, Pashto, Tajik. Well, Abdul Hai is at a school where all of the other students, almost all, are Pashto, and the teachers are Pashto, and it hasn't been particularly easy for him, but he's toughed it out. And so during my last trip, I spent all of May in Afghanistan and Kabul with the Afghan peace volunteers. His teachers asked him to read a poem in English before the entire assembled student body of this high school. And they asked him to read it in English, Pashto, and Dari. And so he came to me and he said, "What poem?" And I was pretty happy. The last time I had been with him, I had shown him one of Dan Berrigan's poems, and he had liked it quite well. And I said, "You know that poem." So he took the poem, and I'll just read it to you now. If you can imagine a youngster reading this poem in 3 different languages, and how great to tell 93-year-old Dan Berrigan, guess what? Your poem has been consumed in Afghanistan. Some stood up once and sat down. Think of yourselves, okay? Some walked a mile and walked away. Some stood up twice, then sat down. It's too much, they cried. Some walked 2 miles, then walked away. I've had it, they cried. Now's the time you think of yourselves. Some stood and stood and stood. They were taken for fools. They were taken for being taken in. Some walked and walked and walked. They walked the earth, they walked the waters, they walked the air. Why do you stand? They were asked. And why do you walk? Because of the children, they said, and because of the heart, and because of the bread. Because the cause is the heartbeat, the children born, and the risen bread. Because the cause is the heartbeat, and the children born, and the risen bread. And I know it's almost as though we've been imprisoned or chained by this MIC, military, industrial, media, congressional complex that weighs us down so much. But let me offer just one more story. I was in prison in 2003 because of crossing the line at the School of the Americas. And there was a morning, on a Saturday morning, I'd had my cinnamon roll already, and I was in the library trying to bang some, at the time, Arabic into my head. And all of a sudden, some women came running in to get me. "Oh, girl, you got to come right away. You got to see what's on TV." And I thought, oh, it's a tsunami, it's a hurricane, it's a typhoon, and went running to go watch CNN with them. And what had so upset them were the photos that had quickly become iconic. The pyramid, the man and the dog, the man on a milk crate, the man on a leash. This was the first time that the pictures had emerged from Abu Ghraib. And the women in the prison were looking at those photos being run again and again, and tears were streaming down their faces. And I thought at first, they're feeling such strong emotion because they can identify with those prisoners so easily. Maybe that was true. But I think what was more true was that they were weeping because of an emotion of patriotism. The women prisoners asked me, "What's going on over there in Iraq? What's happening to our country?" And then they asked immediately, "What can we do about it?" And I said, "Well, not too much, we're in prison." gathered out on the oval track, holding their hands, raising their hands, praying for forgiveness, praying for their children, praying for the children of the soldiers, praying for the children of the other guards, praying for the children's future, praying for peace. They prayed their hearts out. And of course, I'm not trying to give you a faith-based pitch. I just want to say that part of what liberates ourselves is our own yearning. And let that yearning motivate our lives. Let revolutionary dissent motivate our lives. And let the loving smile of your goodness and your grandchildren's goodness just flow right through us. Peace is flowing like a river. But when we get to that stream, let's go across. Thank you very much. I do want to say for any who might not have been here earlier, that poem I just read was actually dedicated to the Plowshares 8, but there is a Plowshares group awaiting sentencing right now. These are the people who take to heart so earnestly the words from the second chapter of the book of Isaiah, when shall come the day, O Lord, when they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift the sword against nation, neither shall they continue to learn the ways of war any longer. And these plowshares activists take that so seriously. They go right into the places where the nuclear weapons are and are prepared to do symbolic denting, damaging of the weapons and pour their blood. And in this case, they tripped off one alarm, and the guards at the Oak Ridge facility said, gosh darn it, it's those rabbits and those rodents again. And then they tripped off a second alarm, and the guards said, we keep telling those maintenance people to let us know before they go. And so then they tripped off a third alarm, and then the guards got a little more worried. It was the Wackenhut company, like a security contractor, that was doing the guarding of the nuclear weapon facility. So they actually had tripped off about 7 alarms before finally they were stopped. And that meant that the Congress people, when they got word that the Wackenhut security company wasn't doing so well, that an 85-year-old Roman Catholic nun and her 2 companions had been able to go that far in. So now they've charged them with sabotage and with charges that, according to the sentencing guidelines, require a minimum 10-year sentence, and they've been found guilty. So if Megan Rice goes to jail for 10 years, she may die in prison. She will do so much good for other prisoners while she's there and for guards, and I know that. Michael Wally, Greg Nar, Obed Birchie, these are people who have been with the peace movement so consistently. They've just about never missed a beat. Greg and Michelle have raised family and taken care of a Catholic worker house in Duluth. So if you would, please, if you haven't yet filled out a postcard, just sign the postcard. All it asks is that the Judge Thaper, depart from the sentencing guidelines. It's called a downward departure. The judge can do it, and there's some precedent to it. So please do fill out one of these cards. And Maria's so generous. She and John said they already have stamps, Marie Braun and John Braun, from a previous project that, so they'll put the stamps. All we have to do is just sign them. Now, if you're so moved as to want to write the judge a letter, just copy down the address or go on the website for Transform Now Plowshares. Letters would be even better, lots of letters. The sentencing will likely be in September, so these are crucial, crucial weeks. Comments, questions, ideas, criticisms? Oh, yes. I think we'll pass those around, right? Marie, I think, has some cards that she'll pass around. Thank you, Marie. That's Marie Braun right there. And if you could speak really loud, that would be great if you wanted to have a question so we can pick it up on the video. Thank you.
Can you comment more about what you see as what we're going to be leaving in Afghanistan when President Obama says the war is over and we brought our troops home?
Thank
What's
you.
left there?
So the question of what's going to be remaining when many thousands of the troops go home, there's something like 68,000 there now. They're expecting maybe 8 to 9,000. Around the Caspian Sea is a huge deposit of natural gas and fossil fuels. The pipeline that was started when President Hamid Karzai of Afghanistan was the president of the board of UNICAL in the 90s is kind of stillborn. It never went further than a place called Dagestan. So it's called the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline. The Asia Development Bank in 2008 told the NATO conference in Lisbon, Portugal, we'll underwrite it, we'll pay for it. The NATO countries were exultant, huzzah, we can get this pipeline. Hillary Clinton was talking about the new silk routes, roadways that could be constructed so that the rare earth minerals, the lithium, the dibithium, the other minerals that are under the Hindu Kush mountains could be extracted from the mountains and then taken out of the country. Well, you need a pretty strong police force in order to secure those pipelines, to secure those roadways that aren't built yet. Kind of think Lawrence of Arabia, Lawrence and his group, they build some railroad lines and then Lawrence would come out and blow them up. Well, that's kind of, I think, what insurgents might have in mind who are hostile toward the United States. So the United States doesn't necessarily need big, huge military bases to build and to protect those pipelines. They need forward operating bases, they need security contractors, they need joint special operations forces, the Navy SEALs, the Marine Rangers, the Army Rangers, the Green Berets, these extremely well-trained warriors who can do intelligence, do night raids, and call in drone attacks. So I think that's the plan. There's no way that the United States, with 11 years of investment, is just going to walk away from Afghanistan, but it's certainly not there to protect women and children from the Taliban. In fact, under Karzai, the most draconian laws against women were codified. A law that says a woman is not equal to the man in the workplace, in the university, or in her own home, and if a man wants to punish a woman for disobedience, he has the right to do it. So what will be left behind? Warlords are already arming themselves to the teeth. Every cabinet level minister in Hamid Karzai's cabinet is a warlord, with the exception of the Minister of Agriculture. And by warlords, I mean fellows like this fellow, General Dostum, who locked up people whom he perceived as his enemies in train cars and didn't give them any food or water, and they suffocated to death inside the cars. People with their hands bloodied with terrible massacres and crimes. Those crimes have all been documented. The way that people went to Central America and forensics experts would document the results of massacres, that's been done over a 2-year period. And the report is written. And the Afghan Independent Human Rights Center has the report. Dr. Seema Samar has that report. But the warlords have threatened anybody who releases that report will put 30 bullets in your face. And the Afghan Peace Volunteers home is right behind was right behind the Afghan Independent Human Rights Commission office. A bomb exploded over at that office, all the windows shattered and broke at the Afghan Peace Volunteer home. And anyway, we try to move for security purposes once every 6 months. So they're moved to a new home. Thank you.
What do we use in our everyday lives that uses the lithium and these other metals?
And everybody's got them. I mean, even the most remote areas in Iraq. I mean, right after the U.S. military arrived in Iraq, my young friends there made a poster with my picture and Kathy Breen's picture and Cynthia Banis's picture, and it said, "Rent a Whitey," because if you were an American, you could go and get a full box full of these little thumb-sized cell phones. And now, in Afghanistan, actually, you can get, well, I'm sorry to say it, but you can get a better internet connection over there right now if you've got a gizmo than you can here in Minneapolis or maybe in Hagar City. And the telephone companies are vying with each other to make sure that they can control the internet access. So they know that the lithium, the dithium, and these other rare earth minerals are extremely valuable. I think, though, that it isn't so much that the United States wants to bring it over here. I think the United States wants to control the pricing and the flow of these resources so that China won't get these resources at a cheaper price than the United States. We're in a Cold War with China, and the United States wants to make sure that China doesn't advance any further than it already has in terms of being able to have an economy that might catch up to that of the United States maybe within the next 20 to 30 years. Now it's so interesting because China has already built a railroad. You know, while we've been doing night raids and aerial bombardments, and China built the railroad, and they've also now got a pipeline going. And the Iran, Afghanistan, India pipeline, the so-called peace pipeline, has a better chance of going someplace. But the United States, I mean, it's just cuckoo the way that we waste and wreck our own prospects. You know, if we were at all helping people in other parts of the world eradicate poverty and eliminate disease, we could be beloved. But we're instead seen in such a different way. Thank you, Andy.
I have a concern about the use of the word humanitarian in a negative context. No matter what you say about Afghanistan and Syria, there are huge humanitarian crises. And the people there desperately need humanitarian assistance. Yet, in the anti-war movement in Minneapolis, humanitarian aid is considered a dirty word. In the Syrian community in Minneapolis, there are groups that are funding hospitals on both sides of the border, in refugee camps outside of Syria as well as inside of Syria, yet they either no assistance by the anti-war movement because we will not find a Syrian American in Minneapolis who has a good word to say about Bashir al-Assad. But in the analysis of many people in Minneapolis, the only criticism you can make about Syria is against the President of the United States. All due to U.S. imperialism, Russian aid, those massive bombings on Russian planes, the use of Iranian, phenomenal assistance from Iranians to the despotic regime of Bashir al-Assad, the invasion of Hezbollah, these cannot be criticized. The only thing we're allowed to criticize is the President of the United States and U.S. imperialism for many years, 2 years, would not send these weapons to Syria. Now, there was never a word about all the other nations. To me, this is hypocrisy, total hypocrisy, and the anti-war movement in Minneapolis largely follows that hypocrisy.
Andy, I want to tell you that I was a Minneapolis travel agent, booked the flight for me. I was on my way to Beirut to go into Syria, wanting to pursue some better understanding, mostly wanting to see if I could be of some assistance to Mairead McGuire. They changed the dates, and then I couldn't go with the group. The dates changed. I agree with you that we should keep in our hearts a passion for those whose human needs are not being met. We should never pay for war. We must always try to find ways to meet the human needs. But I will say that the greatest disappointment of my adult life was that we could not lift those economic sanctions. And we tried hard. And one thing I kind of knew at that point was that I had to be Johnny One Note. I couldn't say, all right, I'm going to leave this concern about Iraq and I'm going to pay more attention to something equally grievous that was happening elsewhere. So I want to ask you to extend the hand of friendship to all of the people who are your companions in this really hard struggle. We can't all focus on exactly the same way of seeing every crisis. We just can't. But we can love one another. We don't have any choice in a sense to be the beloved community, but to really try to lovingly criticize and challenge one another. But we can't expect every person to to be doing everything. But you are right, humanitarian concern. We could be doing it if we would take the money away from the Pentagon and the wasteful, horrid spending. And the only kid on the block, in a sense, is the United Nations and then the major distribution groups like the ICRC, Save the Children, Oxfam. They know how to do these things with some dispatch. I think the countries of Jordan and Turkey are being tremendously overburdened. They can't handle the refugee population. We need to say lift quotas. We need to do all of those things. And also keep reading, keep studying, keep trying to understand the conflict. But let's try to do that arm in arm, hand in hand with people who have been our companions in this struggle.
Jackie, you have a question from our speaker, Bill Sorem.
Thanks, Bill.
Yeah, I must say, this gentleman failed to mention some really
Bill, come use the microphone. Let's give it a hand for Bill.
That gentleman in the back failed to mention the most important thing, the jihadists of Syria, the people who carry out car bombings and beheadings and suicide bombings and who eat the flesh. We've seen these are horrible people. This is the reason that even Obama had to hesitate sending aid to the opposition in Syria. And this was not mentioned by this gentleman at all. It's not, you just mentioned Assad and no one else. His opposition is just beyond description awful, horrible people. And that's why we should not be sending any aid to them at all.
I didn't mention just Assad, I mentioned Russia, which has been massively
But you didn't mention the opposition.
Hezbollah, and no criticism of Hezbollah.
But you didn't mention the terrorists fighting. That's the key to understanding what's going on there. They are the key. That's why even the imperialists like the US and France and the UK, even they are hesitating helping these people because they know how horrible they are.
Why won't the anti-war groups allow a single Syrian American to speak? They're banned from the calendars of the anti-war movement.
I have no idea what you're talking about. I have no.
Nobody else does either.
You haven't responded to what I said at all.
They are banned by the anti-war movement.
You haven't responded to what I said at all, so forget about it.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you.
Great speech, Kathy. I would like to say words to that gentleman also. You have been studying the history of our goddamn government for the last 60 years to understand what's going on in Syria. We whipped up that opposition. We paid them money. They're a bunch of barbarians from Libya, snuck through the borders. We want Syria out of the way so we can grab Iranian oil. This is more propaganda crap by our government. It's horrifying. Kathy, I had an argument on television with Representative Dana Rohrabaugh, who was upset that the people of Iraq and the government of Iraq wasn't more generous with us, the United States, and giving us more oil for free. That was his shtick. You've been to Iraq. My question is, what do the people that you talked to in Iraq think of our glorious liberation? And by the way, I'm sorry, but I'm furious about my government. You've got a lot of support here. Thank you.
Yeah, you know, I was in Iraq during the shock and awe bombing, and just before that bombing, there were people who were so frustrated by the economic sanctions. I mean, the life in Iraq was so appallingly hard. Many of you knew that. You'd gone back and forth. And they sensed that they were being punished, and yet they had absolutely no control over Saddam Hussein. They wanted to be rid of Saddam Hussein. They wanted to be rid of the opprobrium. They wanted better lives for their children. And so there were some who would pull me aside and whisper, "Believe me, Kathy, we want this war. All in Iraq, we want this war. Just we want to get rid of Saddam Hussein." And I would say, I think that's maybe not what the United States is thinking is its major goal. I said, I think that the United States wants to take your resources. And, well, exactly those same people, about 3 weeks into the occupation, were beginning to recognize that their needs were not at all on the priorities list. What we've done to Iraq is, I think, emblematic of what the United States could and perhaps would do to any other population anywhere on this planet. And that's part of the message. I think, Noam Chomsky had said it when I was a senior at Loyola University. I went to hear this man talk, and he said, the United States wants to communicate to every other country on earth that if you do not subordinate yourselves to serve our national interest, we will eliminate you. And if you live in Central America, if you live in Afghanistan, if you live in Iraq, if you live in the crosshairs potentially in North Korea, in Iran, in Syria, certainly in Libya, then I think that meaning of what Chomsky said becomes so painfully clear, because their survival is very, very jeopardized by the way, and it's true, the United States does rev up the war. We're the arms exporter in chief for the entire world. It doesn't matter who occupies the seat of the presidency of the United States. We've got a corporatocracy that will not go down quietly. And we pay a price, and Jack was right. We pay a price. Chickens coming home to roost is real as well. But the agony, the suffering of mothers who take the bundles of their children to the cemeteries, and they love their children as much as we love ours. It's an unbearable agony, and I just want to say it again, war is not over when it's over. And we can get off of this addiction. We can. It's doable. It would take a tremendous resolve, but nonviolent non-cooperation is something we can learn together. And I'm going to challenge you all right now. Nonviolent non-cooperation. And if we want to learn that nonviolence, then we've got to extend the hand of friendship and keep on trying to overcome our differences, as has been done in this gathering today, using words. Nobody punched anybody yet. I want to hold you to that. Thank you.
What was the attitude of the Afghan people in your office for the American people versus the American government? Did they see a distinction between them?
It would be very hard for me to answer, in part because the majority of Afghanistan's population live in very remote areas. Only 3 to 6% of the population has access to the internet. And although in Kabul you're living in a bubble, and there is a lot of electricity now compared to when I first started going there 3 years ago, we don't have big long outages except in the wintertime. But in the provinces, in Bamyan, they get electricity between 1 and 3 in the morning. So people aren't watching television. They aren't learning English to hear. They're just seeing people behind fearsome masks and big armored personnel carriers and fortified buildings and barbed wire. So they don't have any reason to think that the U.S. is going to do something for them, because there was one horribly constructed road that's already been wrecked that Laura Bush insisted had to be put in Bamyan. And that's the most peaceful province. In the areas where there's fighting going on and where the drug lords and the warlords are battling it out and the weapons are coming in, I think there's no sense that the U.S. is going to be there to protect them. Some of the Hazara population who have been better able, in part because they were refugees in Pakistan and living in a situation where they saw how the women could become better educated and might get somewhere further. Some of those people have, I think, wanted to see more collaboration with the United States. But even that grouping, when they realized that the United States would negotiate with the Taliban without asking them any questions, has now started to turn away from the U.S. And I don't think there is a lot of separation between U.S. government and U.S. people. Thanks, Bill.
Yeah, as a U.S. citizen, I have a terrible sense of guilt for what we've done around the world. And I wish someday I could apologize to those people for what we've done. And I actually have apologized to Sammy Rasuli for what we did to Iraq. But, so I was just wondering what the people you deal with over there in Afghanistan and Iraq, do they know that some of us here are working hard for peace? Do they know that we exist? Or are we just all, you know, out of the same hole over here?
No, I'm glad you said that, Bill. I think it makes a big difference when people learn about the existence of peace groups. The Afghan peace volunteers are just a small microcosm. But when Steve Clements came over with a delegation of about 25, I think, he was talking with kids who at the time were 13, 14 years of age. When they heard that people in Steve's city had been going to a vigil for as long as they had been alive, seeking peace and an end to war, they were just gobsmacked. And when I was over there, I said, I was on a Skype phone call with them last week, and I said, I'm in Minneapolis. They immediately said, oh, Steve, the bridge. So you're on the map in Afghanistan. I mean, surely this people-to-people diplomacy is a way to go. I have a great deal of trust in it. And in fact, these young people are trying to start a group called Border Free. I can't wait to get back over there and be with them and hear more about their ideas. They tried very hard to find one friend in every country of the world. They've only gotten to 57, but they're still working at it. And I think, we may see that in younger groups who've themselves been walloped by warfare, there could be more of a predisposition, even amongst the wealthier ones, to try to put an end to war. But I was chastened and challenged by William Bloom, who said to me, no, it's got to start here. We're the belly of the beast, and if there's going to be an end to all of this warring, what you said is so important. We have to be ready to say, we're sorry. We're so very sorry for the suffering caused. And then to pay reparations. It may be a next generation that would catch on to the wisdom of that, but our security lies in extending that hand of friendship. The question had to do with a sort of an inverse Midas syndrome. Midas touched something and it turned to gold, and the question is, why is it that everything we touch turns to shit? Well, I think that, elected legislators know that by and large people in their district like the comforts that we have. Not to say that everybody's living in comfort, certainly not to say that, but people, I think, have a way of communicating. Don't rock the boat too much. Jack pointed out that in every congressional district, the embeddedness of the military in our everyday life, glorifying war and also saying, hey, do you happen to notice where your bread is buttered? It's happening all across the country to such an extent that people get nervous. They think jobs, 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 and they just don't quite believe that maybe there would be more jobs, 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 and we'd have a much better life, and we wouldn't be turning everything into despair and rubble and destruction if we got out from under this vice-like grip of the United States military-industrial media congressional complex. But I wouldn't despair of the education. I think that, in 12 weeks, the Occupy movement globalized that logo 99 and 1. Now that was something. A lot of us have been trying to do that for a mighty long time, and these young people managed to do it in 12 weeks. So, we should see be open to those possibilities. You don't know what's coming around the corner. I was so glad to hear Jack say, Romero, Romero, Romero. Say it over and over and over again. Let it be your mantra. It isn't necessarily a faith-based thing. It's a justice-based thing. Romero changed his life and listened. He was ready to make the most impoverished the number one priority. We do that and we can't go wrong. If we make the most impoverished our number one priority, we can't go wrong. And then, believe that nonviolence can change the world. We don't quite have that belief system yet. And then I just say one other thing. I think that what we touch would turn out a lot better if we could kind of collectively reinforce the idea of never, never, never letting inconvenience get in the way of living in accord with your deepest values. Imagine if that's what was taught from the pulpits and from the university chairs and chancellors and lecterns. Imagine if that's what was taught by people who are in elected officialdom. And maybe someday it really will be embraced. Christianity caught on back in the year 300. It spread like wildfire. It was an amazing thing given what had gone before. There was, not a lot that augured well for the idea of love of enemy and living simply under the Roman Empire. Again, I truly don't mean that to be a faith-based pitch, so let me say something else faith-based. This is the month of Ramadan. I spent Ramadan last year in Afghanistan, and I just about vanished. It's a very hard month. You get up at 2:45 in the morning to prepare a meal that has to be consumed and drink anything you're going to drink for the rest of a very long day before the call to prayer at 3:45 in the morning. And then you go through the day and you're dehydrated and you're hungry and it's not so easy. And when the sun goes down, then finally you have a date and you drink things and you can have a sense of relaxing, and it's a lovely thing to do. But every family tells their children, the reason for this month that we're doing this, that we're not drinking any water all day long, is because there are people in other parts of the world who never have clean water to drink, who never have enough. And we're going to take the money that we would have spent on bread in the morning and bread and beans maybe in the afternoon. Even the poorest families, we're going to collect that and share that with other people. And we're going to do that for a month. Is that terrifying us? I'm a lot more afraid of Christmas shopping. Yeah, thank you.
I have two concepts that have come to mind. Reparations was mentioned, and at the end of the Vietnam War, part of the peace accord included reparations that the United States was going to pay for Vietnam. And I don't believe that any of those payments were ever made. So I think that, yes, we need reparations, but we haven't really honored it as a social level, on a national level. There's a peace person from Minnesota, Jack Rothbach, who's in touch with a person who has gone back over to Laos every year for 14 years to help to demine mines that we've left there. And it's going to take a lifetime and more. He's training other people how to do it, but this is a project that is monumental, and our country has just abandoned this and left those mines there, and it's damaging, killing people, using limbs and stuff if they touch them. Like he said that Jack and the other fellow who spoke, the one who actually goes there a lot, said that they'll go into a village and say, do you have any landmines? And a young person will say, oh yeah, come here, I'll tell you this one. My grandfather put this up here on this stump that's been there for the last 30 years. Nobody's touched it. Didn't go off. And so then they defuse it. Okay, that was one thing about reparations, and then
cleaning up after ourselves. But the other thing, on a positive note, how we get change in the social order. Occupy. Well, I'm part of Occupy. I like Occupy. But I want to bring attention to The Revolution Will Not Be Televised. It was a film made by an Irish team that was in South America. Was it Venezuela that Chavez was? And they were there when the U.S. sponsored coup was attempted against Chavez, and they were able to film such history of this event and to make this incredible movie which shows you how a social mass consciousness can change overnight. And Chavez was repositioned back into power because even the guards who were holding him hostage and another guard who was then hold in confinement the people who were asserting their authority, they all coordinated that together, moved the people on the street, and they changed it, and it was a peaceful transformation. It's a remarkable film, which is probably, in my view, the best example of how a social consciousness can change like wildfire in a beautiful way.
Thank you. Let's hope for that. Maybe I could also just mention that in Ireland and the UK, repeatedly, groups who have invoked the necessity defense have been acquitted of all charges in courts after they've done considerable damage to U.S. military equipment. The first time I ever saw a drone, it was in 2006 in Lebanon, just following the Israeli-Hezbollah war. And the drones were still doing oversight over an area where a United States bunker buster, a Raytheon Corporation-made bunker buster, had been used to kill children who had been taken down into an underground facility because they were assured that the Israelis had nothing that could hurt those children in this fortified building. And Condoleezza Rice had said to the Israeli government, don't stop fighting now, don't sign a ceasefire. We are rush ordering the Raytheon bunker buster to you, and this will give you an upper hand over Hezbollah. So the war went on. The Israelis got the bunker buster. They fired it into a small village called Hana, and children were killed. Now, we visited the family while their funeral was going on. And I left feeling shamefaced because the mother had said to me, who is the terrorist? As she pointed at the drone above. And then she tapped the plastic over the picture of her darling child and asked me, is she the terrorist? But a group of Irish activists from Derry in Northern Ireland who knew that the Raytheon Corporation had contributed toward making that bunker buster bomb went and visited this woman after they had first gone into the Derry Raytheon headquarters, opened the windows, unplugged the computers, and dropped every single computer out the window. Crash, 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 crash. And then they went and talked with the woman, and then they brought that footage back to the courtroom. And because they could use the necessity defense, the Irish jury acquitted them on all counts because they had prevented a greater harm. They had tried to prevent a greater harm. And the same thing, I was a defense witness in a case in which peace activists in Ireland had done $2.5 million worth of damage to a U.S. Navy warplane parked on the tarmac of Shannon Airport shortly before the shock and awe bombing began. And the trial lasted 3 years, but ultimately the Irish jury acquitted those activists on all 5 counts because they could invoke that necessity defense. Well, that's not allowed to us here in the United States, but I think we should still continue to practice nonviolent civil resistance, to bring our cases before the courts, the court of public opinion, the courts of law. I think that we can keep on the further invention of nonviolence. And, you know, in the anti-war movement, we really are in need of turning over a stone that will get a project that enables us to make a gain. I'm so pleased that there are gains that have been made in the civil rights movement and the Equality of Marriage Act. I'm so glad that there are gains that have been made to some extent amongst our friends that are in the most impoverished human rights situations. They do get some, but we haven't seen gains made in the anti-war movement. So I hope we can, rub shoulders together. We know we're rubbing shoulders with some of the finest people in the world, and really look to make those gains that can give people a sense of boost, a sense of catching courage from one another. And I really hope that the Transform Now Plowshares activists can guide us, because their spirit has been very loving throughout this whole process. Thank you, all of you. Is that my signal to end? All right. Well, thank you very, very much for this time with you.